Hey crowd, how you guys doing tonight? I am glad to be with you for another crowd night. I know we're gonna have a good discussion. Tonight we are continuing on our FAQs that we have been going over, all right? So I'm gonna do the same thing I've been doing. I'm gonna read off the question and then we are gonna dive into it before we finish off with some great conversation as always. So our question for tonight was this: how should we view music as Christians? Now, you guys know I've talked about this before. If you haven't been here when I've talked about it, that's all right. You're gonna learn now that I know a lot of people ask about music, but I always include media in that. Why? I think that there's two things. Okay, number one, I think that sometimes we focus on music and we forget about media. We forget about the things that we're watching, the things that we're interacting with every day. We kind of leave that out. And the second thing is this: I think sometimes people don't want to really acknowledge maybe what they're watching is not as wholesome, and it's a lot easier to focus on music sometimes. But I'm not gonna let y'all get away that easy, all right? We are expanding here. I am going to kind of talk about music and media because I think honestly, music is a part of media, and I think honestly that sometimes there are people who are like, I'm not super into music, and so they kind of feel like, oh, this just bypasses me. But that's not the case for everybody. I know that some people are really into music, but some people are not. But maybe you're super into your podcast, or maybe you're super into Netflix, or maybe you're super into, I don't know, Disney, or maybe you're into those illegal streaming sites that have everything on it. I don't know, but I think that it's important to think about what we're listening to as a whole, not just as music, and also what we're watching and what we're consuming. And so I like to expand and go a little bit past music and kind of talk about media, whether that be podcasts, whether that be shows that we're watching. I mean, technically this could also breach into social media. And so I want to kind of cover that there. So how should we view music and media? How should we view media as a whole as Christians? All right. So the first thing is, I think we need to acknowledge the power that these things have, right? Let's think for a second. What's the last song that you listened to? Maybe you had on repeat. I know some people be listening to songs like the whole day, the whole week, if it's really about that week, right? What's the last song? You don't have to say it out loud, just think about it in your head. Or maybe you could think about how quickly you binged that last Netflix show, wipe that whole season down in a week. Or maybe it's about, the podcast that you were listening to. Just kind of think for a second, that last podcast episode, what was the content? Again, you don't need to raise your hand, shout it out loud, but think about that in your mind. Kind of think about that last content. And let's go a step further. Now, how did this content that you consumed make you feel? All right. So the thing is that media as a whole is such a powerful influencer. Think about watching a movie. You get enthralled with these characters, kind of, right? You start to relate, you start to have a connection with like characters, and coming out of a movie, it can make you feel sad, happy. It can make you feel all these things. I was watching the other night, we do family movie nights, and the other week we were watching a movie and there was a part that somebody was abandoned by their family, and all this stuff happened, and even Mateo, who's only 7, said, oh, I feel really sad right now. Why? Because you're watching, you're feeling that connection, and it's pulling emotions out of you, right? So the last piece of media, whether it be music, shows, podcasts, whatever it is that you've been really in, they can shape how we think, how we feel, how we act without us even realizing it. So it's important for us to think about how do we listen to, watch, be a part of these things, knowing that ultimately, if they're affecting how we think, how we act, they can affect our faith, right? And so how do we navigate that? How do we balance that out? How do we figure these things out by, enjoying, but making sure that they're not negatively impacting our faith? So First thing, you guys already know what it is. What does the scripture say about the things that we consume, right? Here's the thing. I believe that, what we consume can shape what we're thinking on, can shape the motives behind us sometimes, can shape, what you think on, then you speak it. And so it is a lot of the time. That's we see that pattern happening. And so music, movies, shows, these things can plant seeds in our mind, and they can be good seeds, but they can also be bad seeds that get planted in our mind. And so of course, those are things that we have to be aware of, that we have to be conscious of, and then we have to be able to discern those things, right? Proverbs 4:23 tells us this: above all things, guard your heart, for everything you do flows from it. So here's the question, here's the challenge here, all right? The media that you're consuming, whether it be music, whether it be shows, whether you're a movie head like Joshua, whether you're a podcast lover, whatever it is, the media that you're consuming, is that feeding love? Is that feeding joy, peace, patience? Is that feeding the things of the Spirit? Or is that stirring up anger? Is that stirring up anxiousness? Is that stirring up lust? Is that stirring up depression or envy? What are those things stirring up? What are the emotions that you're feeding off of there? Because if they're encouraging thinking on things that are from God, well, I would say that that's positive, and it's probably planting positive seeds. But if they're encouraging things, if they're stirring up things that are not of God, then I think that that is a giant red flag waving at you, that you need to slow down, pay attention, right, to what is going on. I think that something that's important is a lot of time we kind of mitigate, we downplay the influence that media has on us, whether it be music, shows, podcasts, movies, whatever it is that is our main media income, right? The main media that we're putting into our bodies and stuff. And it's often, a lot of the times, not always, but we can often see that it normalizes things that the Bible warns us against, right? Greed, immorality, selfishness. There's actions that a lot of the time, again, not always, but a lot of the time, it can normalize. It can make it seem this is normal. This is what everybody does. Why? Because a lot of our media consumption, the things that we consume media from, are based off of pop culture. And so these things are things that are normalized in the world. And again, we are living in the world, but we are not of the world. And so that's something that we have to pay attention to there. Romans 12:2 tells us this: do not be conformed to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. And I know that, maybe some people think of this and they think, well, that seems a bit intense. I'm not being, conformed. I'm not being consumed by the things that I'm watching or the things that I'm listening to. But we have to also be aware of what it's promoting. And so, for example, I'll take something that's super harmless, right? It's Christmas, coming up to Christmas time. We're hitting December. Okay. So what is super common and super harmless? Our Hallmark rom-coms, right? And so you might be watching a holiday rom-com and it's fun and whatever, but maybe it's glorifying a casual relationship that started from a one-night stand. Do we think that this is putting in the type of things that we want? Oh, wow, she found the love of her life through a one-night stand. Maybe that's how you got to do it. And I know that you're sitting there going, obviously, I'm not thinking that, Lorissa. But those are things that start to become so normalized to us by watching these things. Wow, look how this happened. And it seems so harmless. It seems, something that, oh, well, this is just wholesome and harmless. And it's, it doesn't really matter. It's just fun. It's just all in good entertainment, right? And it's somewhere where we let our guard down. And sometimes when we let our guard down, we forget and we kind of turn off that discerning, rather than saying, hey, this is not feeding something good. This is not encouraging good things. Maybe it becomes a drama series that normalizes revenge, that normalizes gossiping, that normalizes, I don't know, whatever other crazy emotions that can get caught up in that, right? And those are things that sometimes we let our guard down. Oh my gosh, did you see that? But really, you're laughing and encouraging and being involved with the gossip, with the slander, which ultimately is something that we're not supposed to be a part of as well, right? And so I think that it's important to make sure that you don't just let your guard down and say, oh, well, this seems harmless, or this is just, for entertainment, it's just for fun, it's not anything serious. Because I think that we need to make sure that we remember that the Bible calls us to set our minds on things of God, right? We see Philippians 4:8. Finally, brothers and sisters, whatever is true, whatever is noble, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is admirable, if anything is excellent or praiseworthy, think about such things. And so I think that this applies to what we listen to and also what we watch, right? Because you have to think the content that we're consuming. Does this reflect what is pure, what is admirable, all of these, what is noble, all of these descriptions that we're giving? Does this reflect that? Because ultimately, we are gonna go back and think about it. We talk about the latest episode with our friend, we listen to the song again, we think about the podcast, talk about it with somebody. Oh my gosh, wanna know what I listened to, what I heard, whatever it is. We're gonna think about the content that we're consuming ultimately, right? And so does this, could this be defined by these words that we're given, or does this just distract us from God's truth? Does this just distract us or further us or stir up the wrong type of thoughts or emotions? This is something that I think that we need to make sure that we think about, that we analyze before just jumping headfirst into all of these things. What is our minds going to be ultimately set on? And something that I think that we skip over a lot, but I think is really prominent in our generation in this time right now, is this, that media itself can really become an idol. Before we would talk about what you're listening to, what are they idolizing? But I think that a lot of the times we forget the thing that we put, often it can happen where people put music, shows, movies, whatever that they're spending all this time in, they're putting that ultimately above the time that they're spending with God. And I'm not saying that this goes for everybody, but I'm saying that it can happen. And a lot of the time it can happen easier than we actually think, right? The next season that you're binging, are you binging time with God as well? Right? As soon as you get home from work, as soon as you click off your shift, as soon as you get home from school, as soon as you're done studying, are you running to go press play on the episode? Are you running to go watch the latest movie? Are you pulling out your phone and scrolling for hours? Are you, blasting whatever latest song came out? Is that the next thing that you're going to immediately do, spending hours of, instead of spending time with God, right? Exodus 23 tells us, we hear it all the time, but this one's easy and straightforward. You shall have no other gods before me. And a lot of the time I think that we make that more complicated than it really is. And I think that when we break it down, it actually becomes a lot more simpler. At the end of the day, are we giving something more attention and more devotion than we're giving God? And maybe immediately we want to say no, of course, obviously I don't worship music. Obviously I don't worship Netflix. Obviously I don't worship whatever your form of consumption is, right? Obviously I don't worship that, but the amount of time, focus, thought, is that higher than what you're giving God? And I think that can kind of click on a light if you really let it, rather than trying to say, no, of course not. Does that actually apply? And if so, I think that that's something immediately that needs to be addressed. And a lot of the time, people don't even think about this, but this can also be Christian media as well. The, latest album that you love, the latest Christian podcaster that you love, are you giving them more time and attention than you're giving God? Not saying that their content is wrong, not saying any of that. They might be saying things that are good, that encourage your faith, but are you making them an idol rather than giving that time, devotion, and attention to your relationship with God? They can give you good thoughts, they can encourage you, they can do all of these things, but ultimately, they can also become an idol if we're not aware and conscious of what is happening, right? And what we're really spending our time, our attention, and our devotion to, right? I think that a lot of the time we have a lot of different media sources that are constantly feeding into us, and a lot of the time they do promote worldly values. A lot of movies, shows, podcasts, music, right? A lot of the time, especially if it's not Christian based, a lot of the time it does promote worldly values, money, fame, pleasure, instant gratification, and then of course we have a lot of different subsectors out from that. But I think that that's something that we do need to make sure that we're being aware of. Matthew 6:21 tells us, for where your treasure is, there your heart is also. And if we're constantly consuming content that contradicts our faith, if we're constantly putting all of our time and our effort and our money into our subscriptions, into our albums, vinyls, a lot of people have those type of things. If we're putting a lot of our resources into these things, then are we contradicting where we're saying that our hearts residing in Christ are? Are we contradicting where we're putting our treasure with where we're saying our heart is? Because ultimately, like God said, where your treasure is, there your heart is also. Are you justifying all of the subscriptions that you have and dreading giving? Because if so, I think that that is a huge red flag in and of itself. And a lot of the time, again, that's something that can be overlooked, that can be justified, that can be, well, here's the thing, right? I think that those are things that we need to look at across the table. And also, sometimes media can be a great tool for us. It can be a great tool. Listen, we come to church and we sing worship songs. Other people wrote those worship songs, right? That is a form of media that we're consuming. We do plays at Christmas time. Again, another form of media that we're, consuming. Somebody wrote and now we're acting it out, and then we're consuming it. There are tons of great podcasts, shows, movies out there. Are you using those things as a tool, or are those things trapping you? Are those things getting you distracted? Are those things making you think on things that are not good? Are those things stirring up emotions that don't need to be there, that come ultimately from a negative place, that don't come from God? Are those things trapping you in spending your hours and your time and your resources on something that negatively affects you? I think that that's something that we need to look at. We need to use wisdom. We need to use discernment, and we need to be honest with ourselves when we're answering that question for ourselves, right? And so I think that that's something that we need to pay attention to. And, I think we need to be intentional about what we consume, but also about how much we consume. Before you hit play, before you continue, you need to think about, is this helping or hindering my walk? Is the way they're talking, is the words that they're singing, is, the content that I'm watching, is this helping or hurting at the end of the day? Be honest with yourself. The more honest you are, then the better evaluation this is going to be for you, right? The next thing is, music, media, social media, shows. Those things are not bad, but you have to, again, think, is this dominating my life? Is this taking up all of my time? Is this the first thing that I'm going to, the first thing that I'm reaching for? The Bible tells us that everything is permissible, but not everything is beneficial, right? That you could do whatever you want. This is true. You are an adult. You don't live in my house. If you live under your parents' roof, that's a different discussion. But you could do whatever you want, but that doesn't mean that everything that you want to do is beneficial for you, right? And so again, being honest with yourself and really looking at this, is this beneficial? Am I being controlled through this? And maybe you're saying, oh, I'm not controlled by this, but is it what you're always reaching to? Is it what you're always looking to? Then maybe, again, be honest with yourself, right? And of course, we need to use discernment. We need to ask God for wisdom. That's something, obviously not all content is bad, but sometimes it does require us to be able to use that discernment, to be able to ask God for wisdom. Listen, is this really affecting me? Maybe more than I'm realizing. And if so, yes, this is something that I need to stop. I need to take a break from. I need to kind of cut off. And so those are things that we need to analyze. We need to make sure that we're being self-aware, that we're using discernment, and that we're asking God for wisdom in these. And so I think that it's really important for us to be able to honestly reflect. Again, these are questions that you don't necessarily need to answer out loud. Sometimes people do need to be held accountable by other people. Sometimes you're like, hey, I need to be honest with myself here, right? These are tools that can help us, but they can also hurt us. And so I think that we need to make sure that we do guard our hearts like the Bible tells us, that we are aligned with God's truth and what God's word says, and that we're taking account of what our habits are, how much time we're spending there, and are these things helping us grow closer to God, or do we feel them, kind of slowly but surely separating us from Him, which is obviously not what you want. And I think that that's important to pay attention to know, to have that discernment, and to kind of walk through all the different steps before clicking play, before choosing what you're gonna watch, listen to, scroll through, right? And so, like always, we got some questions. I know you guys are gonna have some great discussion with this one. The first one is this: how would you decide if a song, movie, show, podcast is appropriate to consume as a Christian? What is one way that you could decide that? What is a green flag for you to go ahead and consume that content? My second question is this: what challenges do you face when you're trying to limit or avoid different types of media that don't align with your faith? Again, any type of media, podcasts, music, TV shows, movies, social media, any type of media. What is a challenge that you have there? And the third and final one is this: can we use music and media to reflect our faith and connect with others? And again, if so, how? You can expand on that. And so I think that those are some great discussion points to get us going, working, and moving. You guys know that I know you guys are going to have some great conversation with this and really dive into all of the things that we were talking about. I hope you guys have a great rest of your night. I hope to see you guys all soon. Talk later. Bye, guys.